The Daily Horror is a book of Greek myths. The next two chapters, Zeus and his family, and Hera. Zeus was tended by gentle nymphs and was nursed by the fairy goat Amathalia. From the horns of the goat flowed ambrosia and nectar, the food and drink of the gods. Zeus grew rapidly. It was not long before he strode out of the cave as a great new god. To thank the nymphs for tending him so well, he gave them the horns of the goat. They were horns of plenty and could never be emptied. From the hide of a goat he made for himself an impenetrable breastplate, the Aegis, and now he was so strong that Cronus could do nothing against him. Young Zeus chose Medea, a Titan's daughter, for his first wife. She was the goddess of prudence, and he needed her good advice. She warned him not to try alone to overthrow his child-devouring father, for Cronus had all the other Titans and their sons on his side. First, Zeus must also have strong allies. Medea went to Cronus and cunningly tricked him into eating a magic herb. He thought that the herb would make him unconquerable. Instead, it made him so sick he vomited up not only the stone he had swallowed, but his other 5 children as well. They were the gods Hades and Poseidon, and the goddess Hestia, Demeter, and Hera, all mighty gods who right away joined forces with Zeus. When Cronus saw the 6 young gods rising against him, he knew that his hour had come, and he surrendered his power and fled. Now Zeus was the lord of the universe. He did not want to rule alone. He shared his power with his brothers and sisters. But the Titans and their sons revolted. They refused to let themselves be ruled by the new gods. Only Prometheus and his brother Epimetheus left the Titans to join Zeus, for Prometheus could look into the future, and he knew that Zeus would win. Zeus freed the monstrous sons of his mother, Earth, from Tarshish. Gratefully, the 100-armed ones fought for him with all their strength, and the Cyclops forged mighty weapons for him and his brothers. They made a trident for Poseidon. It was so forceful that when he struck the ground with it, the earth shook, and when he struck the sea, frothing waves stood mountain high. For Hades, they made a cap of invisibility, so he could strike his enemies unseen, and for Zeus they forged lightning bolts. Armed with them, he was the mightiest god of them all. Nothing could stand against him and his thunderbolts. The Titans fought a bitter battle, but at last they had to surrender, and Zeus locked them up in the Tartarus. The 100-armed monsters went to stand guard at the gates to see that they never escaped. Atlas, the strongest of the Titans, was sent to the end of the world to carry forever the vault of the sky on his shoulders. Angry with Zeus for sending her sons, the Titans, into the dark pit of Tartarus, Mother Earth now brought forth 2 new terrible monsters, Typhon and his mate Echidna, and he sent them against Zeus. They were so fearful that when the gods saw them, they changed themselves into animals and fled in terror. Typhon's 100 horrible heads touched the stars, venom dripping from his evil eyes, and lava and red-hot stones poured from his gaping mouths. Hissing like 100 snakes and roaring like 100 lions, he tore up whole mountains and threw them at the gods. Zeus soon regained his courage and turned, and when the other gods saw him take his stand, they came back to help him fight the monster. A terrible battle raged, and hardly a living creature was left on earth. But Zeus was fated to win, and as Typhon tore up huge Mount Etna to hurl at the gods, Zeus struck it with 100 well-aimed thunderbolts, and the mountain fell back, pinning the Typhon underneath. There the monster lies this very day, belching fire, lava, and smoke through the top of the mountain. Echidna, his hideous mate, escaped destruction. She cowered in a cave protecting Typhon's dreadful offspring, and Zeus let them live as a challenge to future heroes. So, her children are Nemean Lion, Cerberus, Landon, Chimera, Sphinx, and Hydra. The Cerberus is the 3-headed dog, and he comes to play in a lot of other myths as well. Now at last Mother Earth gave up her struggle. There were no more upheavals, and the wounds of the war soon healed. The mountains stood firmly anchored, the sea had their shores, the rivers had their riverbeds, and ox-horned river gods watched over them, and each tree and each spring had its nymph. The earth again was green and fruitful, and Zeus began to rule in peace. The one-eyed Cyclops were not only smiths, but masons as well, and they built a towering palace for the gods on top of Mount Olympus, the highest mountain in Greece. The palace was hidden in clouds, and the goddesses of the seasons rolled them away whenever a god wanted to go down to earth. Nobody else could pass through the gates of clouds. Iris, the fleet-footed messenger of the gods, had her own path down to earth. Dressed in a gown of iridescent drops, she ran along the rainbow on her busy errands between Olympus and earth. In the gleaming hall of the palace, where light never failed, and the Olympians sat on 12 golden thrones and reigned over heaven and earth, there were 12 great gods. For Zeus shared his powers not only with his brothers and sisters, but with 6 of his children and the goddess of love as well. Zeus himself sat on the highest throne with a bucket full of thunderbolts beside him. On his right sat his younger sister Hera, whom he had chosen from all of his wives as his queen. Beside her sat her son, Ares, god of war, and Hephaestus, god of fire, with Aphrodite, goddess of love, between them. Next was Zeus's son, Hermes, the herald of the gods, and Zeus's daughter, Demeter, goddess of the harvest, with her daughter, Persephone, on her lap. On the left of Zeus sat his brother Poseidon, the lord of the sea. Next to him sat the 4 children of Zeus, Athena, the twins Apollo and Artemis, and Dionysus, the youngest of the gods. Athena was the goddess of wisdom, Apollo the god of light and music, Artemis goddess of the hunt, Dionysus the god of wine. Hestia, the eldest sister of Zeus, was goddess of the hearth. She had no throne, but tended the sacred fire in the hall, and every hearth on earth was her altar. She was the gentlest of all the Olympians. Hades, the eldest brother of Zeus, was the lord of the dead. He preferred to stay in his gloomy palace in the underworld and never went to Olympus. The gods themselves could not die, for divine ichor flowed in their veins instead of blood. Most of the time they lived happily together, feasting on sweet-smelling ambrosia and nectar. But when their wills clashed, there were violent quarrels. Then Zeus would reach for a thunderbolt, and the Olympians would tremble and fall to order, for Zeus alone was stronger than all the other gods together. Hera. Hera was the beautiful queen of Olympus, was a very jealous wife. Even Zeus, who was afraid of nothing, feared her fits of temper. She hated all the other wives, and when Zeus first asked her to be his wife, she refused. Slyly, Zeus created a thunderstorm, changed himself into a little cockatoo, and pretended to be in distress. He flew into Hera's arms for protection. She pitied the wet little bird and hugged it close to keep it warm. But all of a sudden she found herself holding mighty Zeus in her arms instead of the bird. Thus Zeus won Hera, and all nature burst into bloom for their wedding. Mother Earth gave the bride a little apple tree that bore golden apples of immortality. Hera treasured the tree and planted it in the garden of the Hesperides, her secret garden far to the west. She put a 100-headed dragon under the tree to guard the apples, and ordered the 3 nymphs of the Hesperides to water and care for the garden. Zeus loved Hera dearly, but he was also fond of rocky Greece. He often sneaked down to earth in disguise to marry mortal girls. The more wives he had, the more children he would have, and all the better for Greece. All his children would inherit some of his greatness and become great heroes and rulers. But Hera, in her jealous rage, tormented his other wives and children, and even Zeus was powerless to stop her. She knew how tricky Zeus could be and kept very close watch over him. One day, as Hera looked down on earth, she spied a small, dark thundercloud where no cloud should have been. She rushed down and darted into the cloud. Zeus was there just as she had suspected, but with him was only a little snow-white cow. He had seen Hera coming, and to protect his newest bride, Io, from her wrath, he had changed the girl into a cow. Alas, the cow was as lovely as the girl, and Hera was not deceived. But she pretended to suspect nothing, and begged Zeus to let her have the dainty cow. Zeus could not well refuse his queen such a little wish without giving himself away, and he had to give her the cow. Hera tied the poor Io to a tree and sent her servant Argus to keep watch over her. Argus had 100 bright eyes placed all over his body. He was so big and strong that single-handedly he made an end to the monstrous echidna who had lived in a cave and had devoured all who had passed by. He was Hera's faithful servant and the best of the watchmen, for he never closed more than half of his eyes in sleep at a time. Argus sat down next to the cow and watched her with all his eyes, and poor Io had to walk on 4 legs and eat grass. She raised her mournful eyes to Olympus, but Zeus was so afraid of Hera that he did not dare to help her. At last he could no longer bear to see her distress, and he asked his son Hermes, the craftiest of the gods, to run down to earth and set Io free. Hermes disguised himself as a shepherd and walked up to Argus, playing a tune out of his shepherd's pipe. Argus was bored, having nothing to do with all his eyes but watch a little cow, and he was glad to have music and company. Hermes sat down beside him, and after he had played for a while, he began to tell a long and dull story. It had no beginning, it had no end, and 50 of Argus's eyes closed in sleep. Hermes droned on, and slowly the 50 other eyes fell shut one by one. Quickly, Hermes touched all the eyes with his magic wand and closed them forever in eternal sleep. Argus had been bored to death. Hermes then untied the cow. Io ran home to her father, the river god Anachos. He did not recognize the cow as his daughter, and Io could not tell him what had happened. All she could say was moo. But when she did lift up her little hoof and scratched her name, Io, in the river sand, her father at once understood what had happened, for he knew the ways of Zeus. Inachos rose out of his riverbed and rushed off to take revenge on the mighty thunder god. He flew at Zeus in such a rage that to save himself, Zeus had to throw a thunderbolt, and ever since the bed of the river Anachos in Arcadia has been dry. Hera was furious when she saw that Argus was dead and the cow Io had been set free. She sent a vicious gadfly to sting and chase the cow. To be sure that her faithful servant Argus would never be forgotten, she took his 100 bright eyes and put them on the tail of the peacock, her favorite bird. The eyes could no longer see, but they looked gorgeous, and then they went to the little peacock's head and made it the vainest of all animals. Pursued by the gadfly, Io ran all over Greece, trying to escape from the tormenting sting. She jumped across the strait that separates Europe from Asia Minor, and ever since it has been called the Bosphorus, the cow ford. But still the gadfly chased her all the way to the land of Egypt. When the Egyptians saw the snow-white cow, they fell to their knees and worshipped her. She became an Egyptian goddess, and Hera now permitted Zeus to change her back to her human shape. But first she had to promise never to look at Io again. Io lived long on as the goddess queen of Egypt, and the son she bore to Zeus became king after her. Her descendants returned to Greece as great kings and beautiful queens. Poor Io's sufferings had not all been in vain. Zeus and Hera.